Welcome, ladies and gentlemen of the public, the members of the planning board, Lauren Lind and Angela Gessio, who is supporting us this evening. Welcome to the February 23rd, 2022 meeting of the Cohasset Planning Board. It is 6:30 p.m. and we will begin our meeting with roll call. Mr. Brewer.
Clark Brewer, present.
Mr. Callahan.
Present.
Mr. Colery. Mr. Grady.
Present.
Mr. Potter. Amy Glassmeyer. We have sufficient members to begin. Lauren, would you like to indicate to the public how the timing of the meeting is going to go tonight, as well as how they might participate?
Certainly, thank you. So first, I'll just let you know, members of the public, we have 3 public hearings on our agenda tonight that were continued from the last session. Administratively, we didn't cover any information, so we'll hear all of those public hearings. We have a discussion about a lot release request for a subdivision, and then there's an Elm Street Corridor Working Group update at the end of the meeting. For any members wishing to address the board on a particular topic, there will be a designated time for public comment for the public hearings. We do ask that you insert your name and address into the Q&A function at the bottom of the screen. You can either leave written comments, or you can just state that you would like to address the board, and we can promote you to panelists that you can use your microphone and camera to speak to the board. And we will ask you to state your name and address to the record. We ask that you try not to repeat items that have already been stated and keep your comments to 3 minutes maximum. Thank you.
All right,
I'll turn back to the chair.
We have 3 public hearings. The first public hearing is a continuation of the Village Business District Special Permit for live or mechanical entertainment filed by Split Rock Social, Inc. The subject property is 12 Parkway. Please begin.
So I'll just introduce, thank you. Ryan Hilton is here for 12 Parking Way. And just to give you some background on this application, we read the public hearing notice at the last meeting and it was immediately continued. This project is a special permit under the Village Business District. If you look at the table of use regulation, it defines live or mechanical entertainment use needs a special permit from the planning board. This was discussed during the planning board site plan review application for this same applicant and at this parcel, which was granted in recent months. So this is the next step as the applicant looks to address their entertainment plan. I'll also note that this is sort of a unique situation because this also requires an entertainment license from the select board. So one does not exempt the other. You actually need both. The applicant is coordinating with the select board and filing for that application, and we're working on that. And we did connect our town council, who advises the planning board, with there's a different attorney who actually works with the select board on liquor licensing and all sorts of licensing matters. So we did have we did convene with the attorneys and staff to get everyone up to speed to make sure that we're not going to be in a position that these things will be in conflict with one another. So with that, I'll turn it over to Ryan to just sort of update you. And then Ryan, if you could just walk through the plan that you submitted to show, what your plans are for entertainment, where the locations will be, sort of those, and then the board may have some questions.
This will be a graphic, is that correct?
Yes. I didn't, yeah, are you talking about the, which graphic are you referring to? Just the plot plan, Lauren?
I was wondering if you were going to actually display something.
Yeah, so Ryan, there was a plan submitted where you defined what your entertainment plan was and where the locations were for things that was submitted with the application.
Could you promote Erin Herman as well, please?
So Erin's actually not in the attendee list.
Oh, she's not? Okay, let me text her. I don't think we've provided anything beyond what was included in the plot plan, though.
Let me.
I have the site plan, I have the lighting plan. I'm not sure what you're referring to, sorry.
I personally didn't know that there was going to be one. This was really a question for you. If you had some image or something you wanted to show.
Yeah, no, unfortunately, no additional images beyond the site plan and the renderings, which we've shared in previous meetings here. Happy to pull those up again. But yeah, no, I mean, beyond that, there was no additional for the music. It was really just seeking approval
So if you
for.
wouldn't mind just bringing up the site plan, I think it would help so that people can get a sense for the setting.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Just open that real quick. Okay. Okay, is this visible now?
I don't see anything yet.
Yes, there is a site plan on the screen. Amy, you can't see it?
I can't, but that doesn't mean that everybody
I can see
else
it.
can.
I
Okay.
can see it. It's a site plan.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, yeah, so just to refresh everybody's memory on this project, to orient you here, we're looking at 12 Parking Way to the kind of northeast here. This is South Main Street. Over here, we have Stagecoach Way along the northern side. This building is the existing building within 12 Parking Way, and behind that here to the south is the public parking lot. So you would enter here, entry and exit will be coming in here from the parking lot through the long walkway. We'll have some tables here along the left-hand side, landscaping around the, we're actually bringing in a landscape architect to really give it more of a beer garden feel, which will make it much more enclosed than it is today. So we're actually incorporating fencing and arborvitaes along here on the backside. The only reason I bring this up is that it is going to be a much more enclosed space than it is currently, which should help with the any kind of music. Additional trees, bushes, shrubs here along the side. There's actually a big garden space here that's fairly empty currently that we plan to add quite a bit to. In the rear of the lot here, we have our 40-foot container bar, which will include actually three. This is a bit outdated. It'll have three toilets, one ADA accessible toilet, and two additional toilets per the recommendations of this board in previous meetings. We've consolidated this to one fire pit, and then there's bench seating tables here along the exterior. So we don't envision, the large majority of the time we envision mechanical music through kind of a Sonos type system, which will likely just have speakers on the exterior of the container bar. However, occasionally we're seeking approval for occasional live acoustic music for guitar players, nothing more than a 1 or 2 piece musical act, which we envision taking place here in this corner and directing kind of a single speaker probably towards the audience here, towards the crowd. Any questions on the layout or configuration?
No, this was very helpful. So this is an unusual situation. We haven't really come across this exact situation, although we did have one a year ago that was somewhat similar. So what I want to do now is have the planning board members comment on their perspective regarding the sound that will be potentially generated as a result of the oyster bar. I think the one thing that's important for the planning board members to recognize is that we are in a position to condition the use of music as a result of the special permit. So if you have thoughts about that, that would be useful for you to provide now. I will also let the planning board members know that I met earlier today with our lawyer and discussed what would be a set of issues that we would be required to consider as a part of the special permit. But I'd like to hear from everyone else first.
Well, I don't have a problem with it. The selectmen, I presume in their license, are going to dictate the hours, which would be the only concern I really have is how late they go. I don't know if they regulate volume, but I don't know if that's an issue. I mean, I'm looking at this as that as we redo the bylaw to take this special permit requirement out for this. and, you know, wrap it into the special permit or site plan review for the use, but, so I have no conditions to add to this other than whatever it is the select board adds with respect to time and volume.
All right, thank you, Mr. Callahan. Mr. Brewer?
Yeah, so what we approved already was a site plan review. And under the bylaw, that has a specific set of criteria that we evaluated what was proposed. Under the special permit for the village, there's a different set of criteria, similar but different. And we have to have, we would have to have I guess, a unanimous vote of the 4 planning board members in support of the proposal, where we don't have a full board, nor do we have the associate member. In terms of having music there, I haven't heard of what the time plan is related to the request for live music. You know, whether it's it's limited or unlimited. I'd like to know what the hours that are planned are for music, and
It's a good question. Yep. Let me know if you want me to
already
respond to
figured
that.
out. Yeah, but if you could let us know, that I think would
Sure.
make sense. But in terms of the criteria, I don't have my zoning bylaw in front of me. But I guess I would ask our town planner whether there's any criteria in the special permit for the village that she sees as being problematic for this reapplication.
Thank you. No, I'm not seeing anything that's problematic. Like I said, I did convene with our town council as well to review the criteria here. I have a couple of draft conditions that you may wish to consider. And I think really what the board needs to determine is, you know, are you comfortable with the plans that have been set out? You know, do you want to specify it's acoustic music only? There's like certain things like that you could sort of tailor. And I think, you know, just to make sure that if there's any deviation from this, that it can be as we would treat any special permit. If there is, you know, a subsequent permit that alters the plans that were agreed upon here, then you can inquire at the board as it's a minor or major modification. So that would be my suggestion. And, you know, again, I know there's also just another point. There was something raised about, I believe it last time as well, it was brought up about concern about how, you know, if there was a lease agreement to rent out the space, how that would be transferred. You could also include some language that just a copy of the decision would be kept on site, and that, you know, any lease agreement parties would be subject to the same conditions, if that would make the board more comfortable.
I have those two written down. Paul Grady?
I think they've already conditioned themselves. Mr. Hilton there, and I think Ms. Herman said that they're going to be playing acoustic music. So to me, it's kind of a no-go. I'm all for it. I think they already put the conditions on themselves that Lauren just brought up, some of them anyway. So I'm all for it. I think it's a nice project, and I'll leave it at that.
Okay, great. Well, then with that, I will just,
Do you have the conditions you can put up on the screen?
if Lauren wants to give me the access,
So
I can do that.
do you have, I also have just a quick synopsis typed up. Do you want to, do you want me to start, or do you want to share them?
Well, I have them outlined and sort of ordered, so I'm easy, but I think I have them set up for them to go. If you want to give me access.
Sure, you should have access.
Just a quick question. I haven't heard about hours of operation, but
Yeah, you're gonna.
I would say, generally speaking, having music at this thing, I agree with Paul Grady's assessment, is a no-brainer. If it's acoustical music, I don't think it necessarily has to be limited to acoustical. But, you know, whatever it is, so that it doesn't disturb the residents that are, you know, a few feet away is going to be important. But the hours of operation, I think that to be reasonable, that would be critical part of any decision. And the level of sound, I think there's a state requirement of 10 dB over ambient. And I don't know if that's achievable with live outdoor entertainment or not. Or there's some kind of waiver that would be put in place. But I think, in order to have the concept successful, I think having some sort of entertainment option is a good idea that supports the business plan for this project.
All right, thank you. Mr. Hilton, could you release the sharing so I can share my screen?
Yeah, of course. Would you like me to respond to the hours at this time or hold off?
You can go ahead.
Sure. I just to kind of reiterate the hours of operation. We are planning to be open Tuesday through Saturday, 12 p.m. to 9 p.m. and on Sunday from 12 p.m. till 6 p.m. So fairly limited hours
Great.
as it is. Yeah.
Those are within the bounds of the ones we talked with our council. Okay,
Great.
so share my screen. Okay, so this was the result of about a 45-minute conversation relating to the fact that we are doing this. This is the first time, and there are certain kinds of responsibilities we have to everybody around. And that this is, since it's a first run, we're anticipating that there'll be adjustments and tweaks here and there. At the same time, we wanted to sort of get everything out on the table so that it worked for you and it also worked for us, because it goes from us to the select board, and so we have to do our duty. So one of the things is to have a sound plan. So rather than taking it for granted that it'll just happen and it'll work right, it's recommended that you actually configure a sound plan for yourself and for the people that are going to be providing music so that it's clear to everyone. We thought that it would be worthwhile for you to talk to the folks at the Music Circus because they have the experience of managing sound, and I'm sure they would be happy to provide you with some insights. Another is to explore how other venues like the one you have create sound barriers, because there are examples of that. I looked around New England and found a couple of them. Another would be to have some kind of a notification and even perhaps a meeting of the venues right around you who you will be situated within, so that they're aware and, they may enjoy, they may want to be a part of it. And also find out what people are willing to accept, so that there may be go, no go, and most of the time it's go, but you want to be a good neighbor, and I'm sure that's what they would like too. So be proactive.
Sure.
You want to be able to trace out how a use of music would occur, start to finish, set up and breakdown, because you're going to have people that you might have somebody with stand-up bass, you might have somebody who comes in with a small drum set, and you just want to understand how that's going to work so that it works for you. You mentioned the days that are available, so I don't need to say anything more than that. The issue came up about private meetings, and if somebody wanted to rent out the Oyster Bar, for example. And what we thought was that during the first year of operation, that would be something that would be better off to leave until after one season of what you see what happens. Mainly because if you let out your location and then you're not there to supervise, that becomes an issue that we have to think about. Another item is to avoid having karaoke. That would be, yeah, I know you probably feel the same way. And some of the things that I am writing were really on the advice of the lawyer, and we recognize that this is a trial, right? This is something brand new. We don't know. What we do is want to have it so that, we want to craft a condition statement so that it's not tying your hands, but also respectful of the kinds of responsibilities that we have. And that I didn't get a chance to ask Lauren this, but after a certain period of time, I'm sure that the permit could be modified as they learned how to manage the sound in different circumstances. Is that possible, Lauren? I mean, they'd have to come back to us, but it would be the case. It's not like we're going to put their feet in cement and this can't change.
Right. So I don't know whether we can certainly condition them to come back, just to, unless there's a reason. This is, again, sort of a strange scenario where the planning board typically doesn't monitor and regulate sound. So I think that some mention in the conditions of a deference to the licensing for select board, because there's a process. I mean, typically, if there's a complaint or some sort of concern about sound, it's not going to come straight to the planning board. It's, it's going to work its way through the select board and likely other departments. So I'm trying to think of a way that we could establish this. May I just make some suggestions?
Yes, sure.
Sure. So I think that this is really great that you put this together, and I think it outlines sort of the thought of the findings, but for the language of the conditions, I think we need to, we will vet this all with council, but I think we just need to sort of tailor this down. Some of these items are not really sort of enforceable in the way that they're phrased. So I think to separate some of these sentiments out into what the board's findings were, and then we can translate into conditions that way it's an enforceable document.
Okay, that sounds great to me. So is that okay for Ms. Herman and Mr. Hilton?
Yep, that's fine.
Yeah, it seems reasonable. And just to confirm, Lauren, will we need this document to be complete before the entertainment hearing, or I'm not sure if the entertainment hearing is happening on March 1st or not. But
it was supposed to be part of the March 1st meeting, but I think it's contingent on if this passes. Is that right, Lauren?
Right. I believe that the select board wanted the planning board to have a decision prior. Madam Chair, may I suggest, because as I was listening to your conditions, I incorporated some of them into the template that I put in. Would you like me to walk through these? And if the board is okay with these conditions, then I can work based on the findings that you've discussed. And if the board's comfortable, I can work with Carolyn to craft in our typical decision format, and then we can move forward from there.
That's fine. So then if you do that, then we would vote on it. Then you would meet with Carolyn, and then you would give it to Ms. Herman and Mr. Hilton, and they wouldn't come back to us, right?
Correct.
Good. All right.
great.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. So I'm going to share my screen briefly. I didn't have the opportunity to put this into the typical format. So in our typical decision format, you will see the summary letter to the town clerk explaining what the vote was, what the history was. You'll see the plan contents. You'll go through the findings that you made subject to special permit conditions. And then if the board chooses, there's conditions that follow. The top one, I've just tweaked it. It's sort of a boilerplate to what we typically have. It typically, in some of our special permit criteria, we make a specific reference to Conservation Commission jurisdiction or whatever board may be that we already know they need to go to. For this one, it's again the statement that they need to get any necessary permits from other boards, but specifically I've called out the entertainment licensing for the Class Select Board, and then the statement that if any subsequent permit alters the plans on which this permit is approved, they would return to the board to determine if it's minor or major. That's a common phrase that we use in a lot of our decisions. The second, I left a template here to say hours for mechanical or acoustic live entertainment. If you want to remove this word, we can. That's the board can decide. And that shall be allowed to. If you want to put in a time, or you can just defer to shall be determined by the select board entertainment license. I'll pause there to see if the board has any sentiment either way there.
Yes.
I think when we were conditioning the harbor, we said no later than 9 o'clock. Is that right? So I think they sound like they're in alignment with our past experience.
Doesn't the select board choose that?
Yeah, it's the select board's jurisdiction for that. So let them deal with it.
Okay.
That'll be determined. Okay. And again, I will tighten up all of this language as necessary with council if needed, but we're getting just a sentiment here. The third is to correspond with what the chair just stated, applicant shall establish a sound plan and communication plan for correspondence with the butters and entertainment providers. And then in the findings section, I'll elaborate more on the thoughts that you had. And then the fourth is just a copy of this decision, and a corresponding decision shall be kept on site and distributed to any lease agreement parties.
Perfect. And it just needs a finding that we find that this proposal is not substantially more detrimental to the neighborhood. That's the sole finding for a special permit. And I would, if I can make a motion, move to close the hearing and issue a special permit based on these conditions.
I'll second it.
Right, roll call, Clark Brewer,
Clark Brewer, aye.
Tom Callahan,
Aye.
Paul Grady,
Aye.
Amy Glassmeyer, aye. Thank you very much.
Thank you so
And,
much.
Thanks, guys.
Look forward to seeing it and
Yeah.
hearing.
All right, sounds
Good
good.
seeing
Thank
you
you.
all.
Thanks, I'll
Bye.
coordinate with you tomorrow.
All right, thanks,
Lauren.
Lauren. Have a good night.
All right, next I'm going to bring up our applicants for 270 Jerusalem Road. I'll just give a moment for them to join us.
And would you give a brief introduction, please?
Yes, I will. I'll just wait for them to be here because when they get brought up, they leave the meeting for a second. So, all right. So I'll give a brief introduction, but first I'll introduce the applicants here. We have Nancy Sadecki of Meyer and Meyer Architects and Sean Papich. He's a landscape architect for the applicant. Nancy, was there anyone else that you wanted on the panelists here tonight?
Mike Hilsinger is available as an owner's representative today, or property.
Okay. I don't see a mic in the attendees, but I'll keep an eye out if he appears.
Yeah.
All
Okay,
right,
great.
thank you.
All right,
So-
good evening. Oh, should I go or no?
Oh, I'm just going to give the board and the public a quick overview, and then I'll turn it over to you.
Okay.
So thank you for being here tonight and for joining us. So this, again, a situation, we opened the public hearing last week, but it was immediately continued to this meeting date. So we didn't cover any material. So tonight you'll hear an application for a large house review for 270 Jerusalem Road. This is, it is an addition and a renovation to an existing structure. It is not a raise and reconstruct. The applicant has been coordinating with staff, with the Department of Public Works, Fire Department, and has been, I will say, very proactive and engaged along the application process. I think that's all I really have for this one. I'll turn it over to the applicant, and if there's any other process questions or anything along the way, I'll be here. So thank you.
Okay, good evening, everyone. I'm Nancy Sadecki with Meyer and Meyer Architects. And as Lauren said, I have Sean Papich here from as our landscape architect. And Mike Hilsinger is also here representing the owners. He's their property manager. And the owners, the Means, I understand, are planning on joining us. So they are present as well. I'm going to share my screen. And let me know when you see 270.
We have a question in the chat.
That's someone, when we get to public comment, there's a member here member of the audience that would like to address the board.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, great.
And
Does
we can see your screen
everybody
now.
see? Yeah, okay, great. All right, so I'll give a brief overview of the design and the site plan approach. And at the end, I'll hand it over to Sean, who will address planting, tree demolition, and landscape lighting. This is 270 Jerusalem Road. It is a yellow brick home that's roughly 6,500 square feet. It was built in 1905 with a sleeping porch addition on the north side, which is obscured from view on page left. The Means approached us last year to update the home, to modernize it for current day standards, which includes a mudroom and garage addition. The house currently has no garage, as well as an elevator tower and an entry drive-through. They also wanted to add some curb appeal to Jerusalem Road. I will switch over to the site plan. The previous owners had received permission to subdivide the lot, which is shown here. And when the Means purchased the property, they decided to keep it all as one lot in order to prevent any future structures, additional structures in the neighborhood. So then I will switch over to the site plan and briefly talk about that. This is the existing site plan, the architectural site plan. Page right is Jerusalem Road. At the bottom of the page is the common shared driveway. And then on the left side of the page is the existing driveway approach to the house with the parking court at the top. And you can clearly see the building footprint that exists now in the center of the page. And on the right is what used to be an old drying garden. And here is the proposed architectural site plan. You can see the existing driveway on the left and some key additions. Let's see grab some markers here. So the entry drive-through is here. And we have the garage addition right here with terraces at the bottom of the page and the elevator tower here. A key addition that we're proposing in today's presentation is the service drive on the upper right-hand part of the page. This is something the Meehan's asked for to improve vehicular flow on the site. And an added benefit is it improves fire department access. We are proposing an additional access from Jerusalem Road directly. And there just so happens to be a fire hydrant directly across from the service drive apron that we're proposing. So that's an added bonus as well. I did meet with John Dacre of the fire department and reviewed any potential concerns that they might have for this project. And in particular, he requested that we provide a swept path analysis to show the fire truck turning radiuses at the apron of each driveway, which is part of this application. Another department that we reviewed the plans with is the Department of Public Works. We heard from Brian Joyce and any potential concerns he wanted us to address for the site plan review. One of those is visibility from between the access of the service drive and Jerusalem Road. So the goal is really to maintain a lower shrubbery and plantings around the apron to maximize visibility between the service drive and Jerusalem Road. We'll see more of that when Sean goes over the plantings. Another two concerns were about drainage and snow removal. All the drainage for the project will be handled completely on site. There will be no runoff stormwater into Jerusalem Road. Everything will be handled internally. And that goes for the snow removal as well. And Mike Hilsinger, as I said, is here. He can address any concerns about the maintenance of the property, but the plan is to deal with any snow removal on the site proper. I will shift over to the design, briefly talk a little bit about the design. At the top of the page is the existing west elevation, that initial key view that we looked at the beginning, and at the bottom is the proposed. So really there's a few key moves that we're proposing here from a design standpoint. When we looked at the house, it really looks pretty institutional. Was part of our analysis. I think part of that is because of the yellow brick, which is typically associated with libraries and schools. But here it also is sort of just a horizontal building, looks like a horizontal 3-story building. So you'll see in this is an early design sketch. We provided a bunch of exterior images of the project, but this is really the key view. And you can see the vertical element of the elevator tower that breaks up the massing and makes it feel a little bit more like a residential scale. Another key move were the terraces that come off the bottom of the structure. This has two benefits. It really connects the spaces indoors with the landscape, but it also makes it look more like a 2-story smaller scale building because the terraces appear to be sort of more part of the ground. And then the last, I guess, key point here is this hipped roof on the right-hand side of the project that just breaks up that long roof that exists there now. So it really just sort of breaks down the scale and makes it feel a little bit more residential. And again, I'll just pull up this image comparing existing and proposed. You can see at the top left, this is the sleeping porch addition from the 1920s that we're removing and replacing down here with a 1-story entry, drive-through, and screen porch. I did point out the elevator tower here and the terraces below. And you can see how the garage addition here really mimics the drying garden that used to be there. So just sort of takes the same place. When we go back and look at the exterior briefly, I'll talk about materials. Let me just go to, yeah. So you can see the yellow brick here. You can really get sort of a sense that there's a lot of deterioration happening on the facade. The Meehan's inherited this or purchased this project from the owners that were there before, had not really been living there for 5 years. So items that there's a lot of neglect that happened that caused damage that's pretty significant. There was a burst pipe that went unattended, gutters filled and backed up, water leaks going down inside the back of the brick. It spalled the brick, it damaged the brick. Chimneys are leaning, they need to be repaired. This gable pediment here is also in deterioration. You can see the water leaks right here that have been unattended and require a repair. So at the beginning of the project, we brought on a structural engineer and contractor to take a look, and they broached the subject of this being potentially torn down. And we brought that up to the Meehan's, and they said, absolutely not. We've fallen in love with the house. We love the history. We want to work with it. So they are really committed to this as a restoration campaign. So the approach with the materials is to repoint the brick facade completely. Where we are adding on new brick elements, the goal is to use carefully salvaged brick from the dismantled pieces, or where, if we don't have enough, is to use new brick that has an exact match to the existing. We've already been working on that selection for the last few months, and have a palette of a mix of 3 brick colors to mimic the historic modeled look of the existing brick. So we're going to keep the natural brick. For the rooftop, we're proposing slate and copper, and any exterior wood elements will be rot resistant species such as cedar, mahogany, and for the exterior timber elements at the drive-through, most likely fir. The last thing I thought I would touch upon is that the Meehan's have been reaching out to their neighbors, and their feedback was that they wanted to make sure any noisy equipment was not close to their property, that was the sound was muffled, and that it was concealed from view. So any equipment that is required for the project will be enclosed in either a hedge and or a fence, and that will mitigate the noise and visibility. With that, I'm going to pull up Sean's plan, and Sean, you can go over the, oh wait, you want to go to the other one? Skip that. I'll get your color plan up. You can talk about the plantings.
That sounds good. Sean Papich with Sean Papich Landscape Architecture, 222 North Street in Hingham. Thank you for having me tonight. Thank you, Nancy, for pulling that up. As Nancy said earlier, this is a bit of a restoration campaign. This is a little bit of the land that time forgot. I think when you go into this property, it is a very unique parcel in that way. So you have a tremendous amount of ledge throughout the site. We also have, at some point, somebody put some effort into the planting, and it certainly has deteriorated over the years. But at some point, somebody made a level of effort to do a little bit of an arboretum in some ways, and that there are a handful of unique species throughout the property. And so we were intended to keep most of those that we have found. So we intend to do that with some of the trees, as well as essentially just enhance some of the areas that we had already, that we've come upon, enhance some of the plantings, and do a bit of an edit job, really. So you won't see wholesale changes in the landscape. If you drive into the driveway, the shared driveway, essentially you come in through off of Jerusalem Road. There's a buffer there, and there are a few smaller trees that we're going to take out because they're either dead or they're in really tough shape. Damaged dogwood, and also a clump black cherry it's in really tough shape. But so much of the plant material as you come along Jerusalem Road is really just enhancing that buffer and that border. Yeah, right into that area. I'm jumping around on you, Nancy. You're being pretty good.
Oh,
with
yeah.
So as we come in, you have the big open lawn to the right as you're on the shared driveway, and you see kind of a big cloud-looking feature in there, big bubbly feature to the right. Keep going down, Nancy, and there's a huge rhododendron massing there. And so we're intended to kind of edit some of that that's not in good shape, but still keep it and augment the plantings around it, essentially. So really taking what's existing there and doing some editing to it. As you drive in then through the entry, we're going to have some stone walls and columns as you come up the main essentially it's an existing driveway. There's really no change in the layout that much until you get right into entering under the covered area as you come into your auto court. We will have a little turnout area to drop folks off if they want to come straight to the garden terrace, and then you'll move further into the auto court. And again, we have some existing trees there, large oak. You have a couple of other unique species that we were going to remove. Unique species we're going to keep that are up on the hill. They're in okay enough shape to maintain them. They're a little bit rough, but we still want to keep them because they feel a little bit like a museum. So we're going to hold on to some of those on that hillside. There is a rough kind of a white pine right where we're coming in underneath the covered area, and that's going to be removed. That's the intent anyway. And then as you come into the auto court, really the intent is to just, it's almost reshaping what's an existing auto court anyway, and just giving it some geometries and updating it and giving it better circulation. And Nancy touched on that, so I won't touch on it that heavily. Again, the key is down on the service drive. And even along the service drives, along the property line, we're going to tend to keep plant material that's there and then add to it. I'm trying to think, if we go to the garden terrace that we're calling it, there's this existing water feature behind the house. And it is something you don't see so much because we have some evergreen trees that are existing there. There's a series of evergreen trees. A few of them are not in the greatest shape. There's an existing pine that we're going to keep, a couple of other existing large cedars. And then there's blue Atlas cedar, which is a little bit of a funky plant, but it's one of those plants that you kind of leave because it's there and it's a bit of a museum piece. So we're going to leave that, and that's over near the driveway. But the intent is to enhance that water feature area and that little garden terrace to make it feel like it would have been there, over 100 years ago. And then still come back into those terrace areas. You won't really see a whole lot because they'll be up and behind stone walls, and augment those with planters as well as some low planting beds. Again, it's more of a preservation effort and then some augmentation and enhancement. Minimal amount of grading done on the property once you get into those main use areas. The few cedars that we were going to remove up on the garden terrace, but we're keeping two of the five that are up there. Just three of them are looking kind of tough, and they're also kind of interfering with the other two that are up there. In terms of anything else regarding the landscape, we did do a preliminary plant list, a plant palette. Essentially, we used a combination, as you might expect, of native plants and ornamental plants. We're not there in terms of assigning which plants are going to be which. You see the symbols on our plan, but we're not at that point yet. We kind of have to work through you folks here tonight and make our way through some of the other commissions and boards before we kind of finalize the planting plan. I can touch on landscape lighting if you'd like for me to, Nancy.
Yeah, let me pull that up.
Essentially, the landscape lighting, I know there's always a concern at any point to have, if you have any real serious, any heavy glare, any really offensive lighting. And really most of this lighting that we do is low level. It's all low wattage. It's low voltage, essentially 12 volt. It's all stepped down from a transformer. It's not line voltage, so it's all low voltage, typical landscape lighting. We do a lot of pedestals that are little low pedestals where you would have a shroud over the top and just to light the pathways, as well as uplighting some ornamental trees. It's all considered dark sky compliant. We typically have everything dimmable. I know we've talked with Meyer and Meyer about that with any of the other lighting they might have at a residential scale on the house, whether it be sconces or anything that's overhead. So it's a fairly subtle lighting. We tend to go that direction. I'm not sure if you want any other detail on that at the moment, but that's really the summary of the lighting. In terms of the landscape, you can kind of see, at least the graphic there, a fair amount of existing plant material to maintain and preserve as well as enhance. I think it kind of covers it. If you have any questions at the end here.
All right, well, thank you. And thank you for the work and the tour. I'd just like to ask one question about the lighting. It's hard, I'm sure, to imagine how you're going to light the upper level of the building, right? So that there's, but since you had mentioned dark sky lighting, I'm going to presume that that will be the strategy that you use throughout. Is that correct?
Correct.
I mean, if it doesn't make sense, you wouldn't do it, but in general, the objective is not to have bright lights coming off of the structure.
That's right.
Yeah, and if you want to address any of those, Nancy, feel free to do that. And typically what we've talked about within the team is we're going with everything that's dimmable.
And warm color temperature.
Correct.
You know, as Sean said, it would be very selective for any uplighting of trees, which would be soft and dimmable light. Any lights at the structure that illuminate the structure are shining on the walls, not at the neighbors, and would be dark sky compliant. So just really a soft glow, ambient glow of any house or terrace structural elements is what we would be looking for.
All right, thank you. I will now ask my colleagues of the planning board, starting with Clark Brewer, if he'd like to start. And let me ask, do you have
Members of the
something?
public first, I think.
Okay. There's also Mike H. Would you like to say something?
Hi, I'm Mike Hilsinger. I am the project manager and property manager for the Means. And I'm just here to add any or answer any questions that may come up. So we've been working on this for a little while. We're very happy with the results that Meyer and Meyer has produced, and hope that the board agrees. So I'm here to answer questions more so than to comment.
All right, so we will, if we have questions, we'll ask them. So Lauren, would you like to invite the neighbors to talk?
Yes, they'll be joining us in a moment. So we have Jack and Hortense McCarthy of 278 Jerusalem Road. They say they're direct abutters to 270 and they'd like to address the board. So Jack and Hortense, if you could just state your name and address for the record once, and then you may address the board.
Hi there, Jack McCarthy, 278 Jerusalem Road, Direct abutters to 270 Jerusalem Road. Can you hear me?
Yes,
Great.
we can hear you.
Yeah. And can you identify where, when you say you're right adjacent, are you on the shared driveway or are you on the opposite side of Jerusalem Road?
The opposite side. I'll get to that because that's part of what I wanted to talk about. So we're on the opposite side heading towards the ocean. So basically the service driveway is proposed. We're 278 there. And that's actually a good picture. Thanks you, Nancy, for pulling it up, because as direct abutters, we appreciate the large house review. We know the history of the large house review in general, the bylaw that was put through. And obviously we're put in a very precarious and difficult position because the Meeheads are good people. They're neighbors of ours. They've been neighbors of ours for 28 years that we've lived here, and we consider them good friends of ours. And so this is what we want to comment on. Is we think it's great. We would not want anybody else in the town to own such a property that we've lived next to for 28 years, but the Meeheads, simply because of what they mean to the town, to the community, and actually to the neighborhood. Where we have a concern is in that area, what is considered the service driveway. And I'm certain Nancy can pull up various pieces, but that one figure that you can see on 278, the littlest gray one, that's our carriage house that's right on the border, and our house is the other bigger one. The carriage house sits right on the border, basically, and our main home has to the back, that's our backyard between us and their boundaries, is about 30 feet from the boundary. And then we have a porch off of the back there as well, that's probably 15 feet from the house. It sits towards the property. So the bottom line is in the tiniest part of both properties, where it's most congested, where we live and where a lot of the activity is going to go on, or where a service driveway is proposed, is the closest spot to all of us. So that is our concern, because the service driveway, or the proposed service driveway, is presently what we consider a Garden of Eden, because it looks out of our backyard and into shrubbery and bushes and trees. And although it's not been maintained, it'll be a different look, certainly, than what the service driveway is. And the service driveway, the concern is basically it's going to be where grass and where what used to be, garden and shrubbery that's right on the border of ours leading out into Jerusalem Road. I will comment, it's not my job to decide where driveways go, but I know that our driveway that you can see on the picture now, as over the years, is at best suspect coming out of it. So I actually was with Leo as he had the trim folks trim up some of the bushes there. But part of that whole process of adding roughly 3,500 square feet, I think it is, in the lot coverage of permeable surface is going to play out basically in our backyard. And that is our biggest concern, is what used to be is no longer going to be. The house footprint and all of what the Mehans are doing, we think is wonderful. Our biggest concern is that disruption that is going to be there, not just from the creating of it, but from the existence of it, because everyone knows the service driveway is exactly what it's meant to be, a service driveway. And whether that's from the comings and goings of the inhabitants or the delivery folks or anybody else, it's going to play out where nothing ever used to play out. And that's right on the border of our property. So that's the main thing that we'd like to bring to the town's, to the planning board's attention. And in light of that, the purpose of what the large house review bylaw was about, concerning disruption and or other components. The last thing is the area that Nancy had pointed out that had to do with the where the what are they called, the air conditionings, I forget the term.
Oh, the condensers.
Yeah, condensers, etc. Everyone knows. I mean, we have folks in the neighborhood that have air conditioning that may very well be on the phone or on the call tonight as well. When the air conditioning goes on, we don't have air conditioning. We have windows open and we hear it, and they're like 3 times the distance from us as those condensers and or generators or anything else that will be there, that we all use more often than not today. And there's no fence and or bushes in today's world that I'm familiar with that will keep that sort of noise locked in. So again, we're not here to dislike what the Mehans are doing. We think it's wonderful. What we're concerned about is the disruption that it's going to cause in the tightest portion between our property and their property. And we will have a service driver that we'll be looking at versus what we're looking at today.
All right, thank you very much for your comments. Are there other members of the public that would like to speak, Lauren? You're muted.
Sorry. Virginia Jensen of 542 Jerusalem Road has just stated that, posed the question, will there be any ledge chipping or blasting?
Yes, I would say that that's likely, just because of, the nature of Cohasset and the ubiquitous ledge. There does appear to be some here that we'll probably encounter, and possibly some over here. I think when we did a calculation based on, I believe it was Charlotte's comments, the conservation agent, approximately 10 to 15% of the foundation has potential engagement with ledge. And the goal would be to do those at half blasts for the most minimal disruption to the community.
It's going to need a special permit under the new bylaw.
Okay, thank you.
And I would,
Additional
Personal-
comments? If there's no additional comments from the public, for at least right now, then I would ask Mr. Brewer if he'd like to begin.
So I will say I realize this is an ambitious project that the applicant's taking on. I believe that what I've seen so far, they've hired serious support team to pursue trying to find the best solutions for the applicant. But I believe that what's proposed is probably one of the best architectural and landscape packages or plans that we've seen. And just the fact that they're planning to save the structure at probably great expense and enhance it rather than replacing it, I think is a significant move and benefit. So I think to the neighbor, to the location, to the history of the area. So what I don't have the criteria in front of me, but what I've heard from the lighting and the grading approaches, the landscape and the architecture itself, I feel is excellent, superb, and probably one of the best examples we've seen in a decade. So I have no other comments other than a great support for what the applicant is trying to do here. I will say that if there are some mitigating aspects to their design that they can, in particular what Mr. McCarthy brought up, the changed views of their property, if there's some mitigating design work that can be done for that, I think that that would be appreciated. Reaching out to the neighbors to let them know what is being planned is always a good idea. And the applicant team has already said that they're planning to keep all of the drainage on site. So I have no other comments other than that I would be ready to vote to approve without conditions.
All right, thank you, Mr. Brewer. Mr. Callahan?
I'm not ready to vote on this tonight. What's the difference in square footage between the existing house and the proposed house?
The existing house and terrace is 4,500 square foot footprint, and we're adding 3,700 square feet of terrace and addition. That includes the entry drive-through and the garage and mudroom and elevator and the terrace at the bottom of the page.
I'm going to play the devil's advocate under the bylaw, section C1A of the scale of the buildings. How are you complying with building this in relation to scale? I realize the existing house is probably larger than the neighbors already, but I'm hearing a substantial increase in size. And how that fits in with the neighborhood. How does it fit in? You don't necessarily have to answer this now, but I think it's something that can be addressed. That's why I'm not ready to vote on this tonight.
I would like to weigh in if I could to respond to that.
Sure.
I think that the total additional square feet that Nancy just mentioned includes a lot of terraces. It's not the size of the house itself. That house is relatively the same size. It grows a little bit.
That's
with the
true.
garage. But
That's true.
the terraces are really not part of the house. I don't know, again, with the bylaw, what the definition is, but the house itself remains relatively the same size. The terrace.
That's true. We're only adding 1,600 square feet of house footprint. I was giving you a house and terrace total.
Well,
So
the bylaw does speak in scale of the building, and that would include the terrace. And yes, maybe the square footage of it, if we were talking about whether we're at the 3,500 square foot limit for triggering the bylaw, we'd probably only be talking about the house and not the terrace. But in terms of the criteria under the bylaw, the scale of the buildings is everything. And this is substantially larger. I'm just, I'd just like to see how you address that and what your thought is on the scale of the building relative to the neighborhood.
I think the scale is appropriate. I mean, I think what we have tried to do is make the garage keep just right in the same spot as where the drying garden is. So in my mind, that's an appropriate addition. The house doesn't have a garage. We reviewed it being a freestanding building, but this seemed to be the most appropriately scaled solution. And I believe that the terraces on the bottom of the page, while they add footprint, actually reduce the perceived scale of the building from the street. And then on the left, rather than having what we thought as an unsympathetic two-story structure, replacing this with something that steps down and is much more sympathetic with the landscape. So in our minds, we think what we're proposing is appropriately scaled. I think the existing house in general is unusual for Cohasset. I think we're starting, where we're starting from is a little unusual. There's really not a lot of precedents that are similar to this in the neighborhood.
My second issue of concern was that Ms. Jensen asked about was the impact on ledge, and we do have a new bylaw, and if you're going to impact any ledge, you're going to need a special permit under the bylaw. I would strongly suggest you leave the ledge alone and not chip, blast, anything. And I'd like to see you think about that and come back with a design that avoids that. Otherwise, it's a special permit process that you'll need to go through as well. You leave the ledge alone, you're done with this here, So we just went to great pains to change the bylaw to protect the ledge in the town and not see it blasted away when it's not necessary. My last point is, Mr. McCarthy's concerns, I think, are well taken under the limitations of this bylaw. Perhaps it falls under C1B, the preservation of landscaping.
Can you please focus on your?
I know, I'm trying to read it and talk at the same time, which is difficult for me. So the preservation of the landscaping, at least in that area, it's not being preserved for this additional driveway. The property already has a driveway. And then the circulation, which is subsection D, says, yes, walkways and driveways shall be safe and convenient insofar as practical and not detract from the use and enjoyment of adjacent properties and town streets. This is a difficult bylaw to apply for situations like this, but I think McCarthy's concern is well taken. And I'm trying to grasp what is the necessity of this second driveway. I don't see that as justifying either a potential adverse impact on a neighbor or clearing away of landscape. I just looked at the aerial photograph on my phone because I didn't see one presented of existing conditions. And, there's a substantial stand of trees that's going to be lost for the creation of this second driveway. So I would like to, rather than vote on this tonight, just see some consideration to the ledge in this driveway before I would sign off on this one.
Are you finished, Mr. Callahan?
I am.
Thank you very much. Mr. Grady?
I run kind of parallel with what Tom is saying. I think it's a very impressive job you guys have done and put together. And I think it'd be a wonderful house. I am concerned about the ledge, especially with the bylaw just coming into place. I'd like to see none of that touched personally, because that was a big stepping stone, no pun intended. But I'd also like to see work with Mr. McCarthy, if possible. Again, paraphrasing Tom to a degree, the necessity of that driveway affecting good neighbor relations, and if there's something maybe that mutually would be agreeable. And again, there is that big stand of trees. I know this house, but I think what you're doing to it is fantastic. So but I think there should be some considerations made, if possible, the ledge, and with the McCarthys, working with that to come up with something that's maybe mutually agreeable that will still service the home. And that's what I would like to see. So I'm not prepared to really vote on it tonight either.
Are you done, Mr. Grady?
I am.
Thank you very much. I'd like to start by just asking, how high will the elevator shaft be when it's completed? I can't see the diagram numbers.
So it will be, so the average grade is indicated on the elevation, and the max building height line for habitable space is right here. And then the elevator will be 5 feet above that. We have coordinated with the elevator vendor to be able to make this overrun that's required within the hipped roof. And the shaft is, a non-habitable shaft. So, I reviewed this with John Howland, which is listed here, that shafts such as this can go 5 feet above that building height.
And I now see it's 32 3/5. Is that correct?
So the site, that number is relative to the site survey. And they used a datum that I think it's an arbitrary datum. So it references that, but the house is 35 feet tall from the average grade to the ridge and 40 feet to the top of the elevator shaft.
All right. So, so your datum is still within the limits of the.
Yes, they're all, the structure is as of right. And I have reviewed that with Mr. Howland.
Right. All right. So could we see the rear view driveway, please?
Like a perspective or just a plan?
I actually want to look down on it.
Oh, sure. Okay.
So how close to the property line is the edge of the service drive?
It's 6 feet from the edge of the property line, which is, I reviewed this with Mr. Howland regarding where driveway setbacks are allowed to go, and they can't go any closer than 6 feet to the property line. So that's where this line is.
All right, thank you. So in the middle there is a small garden, it appears to be. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, is there, recognizing that one of the issues, at least for some of the members of the planning board, will be contingent on trying to think it through, the best possible outcome for the driveway. Is there any reason that it is not possible to pull the driveway closer to the structure itself, and perhaps even move the little garden a little bit closer so that you could have a slightly larger distance between the edge of the driveway and the property line?
We can look at that, certainly. The reason that we have it pushed to the top of the page is really because, this, you see the elevation here is 30 feet and up here it's 36. So we do have a grade difference that we need to make up. So, without making the driveway too steep, we need the length basically to get that elevation change to happen. So that's the driving force behind that location of the service drive. But we could certainly look at it. I think if we kept the concept, I couldn't promise 10 feet, but a few feet we could do.
Okay, well, I think that certainly is important. Because, it would seem that the issue fundamentally is both sound, but it's also visual. So to the extent that you can get greater distance from the property line, you can provide greater greenery that would, separate the two properties and potentially deal with some of the issues associated with proximity.
Right. So maybe really get a good planting.
Yeah. I know of one instance where somebody brought in 50-foot trees because that was what was required in order to block the two spaces together. So I think it's clear this is an issue, and we're at the starting gates. We're sort of probably 40% of the way, and that would be really great if you could think about that. In terms of ledge, the ledge that you're removing, can you talk about why it is you're removing it and what role its removal will play?
It's interesting because I honestly didn't realize how strongly the planning board felt about it. And so I haven't, I could give this greater consideration as how to leave it there. I think some of the challenges, we don't know what ledge will uncover. We can only see what's visible on the surface. This area here, I think it's probably possible to not have this be usable space. I'd certainly need to review that with the owners and make sure that they're on board with that. But that would be one area I think that would be worth discussion. Over at this area, you can see the outline of the ledge a little bit. It's unclear if we're going to interfere here, but I don't know that we will actually. So it's just not clear in these two areas. The elevator shaft, we don't, that would require where it's not going to go to the basement because we don't want to hit ledge, but we would need a 5-foot pit below the first floor. I don't know if we'll hit ledge. You can see what we see here on the outside of the terrace with the ledge here. So I think we could review with the owners based on the planning board's input and see if we can avoid the ledge over at the Port Cochere, the Sentry drive-through on the northwest side.
Understand that the ledge we're protecting is the one that you can see. If you go 5 feet below the first floor for the elevator shaft and you run into ledge underground, that's not what the bylaw is dealing with. The bylaw is dealing with the visible because that's what projects the unique quality of the town, that we have all this visible ledge. So that's what we're protecting. And if covering it or blasting into it to put up a terrace or this garage structure over up at the top left, that's what we're concerned about, and that's not necessary. I strongly suggest you avoid it.
Gotcha.
Nancy, and this is Sean Papich talking again. A lot of that work on that terrace work on the rear side of the house, we'll call it, on the big lawn side of the house, that won't be probably removing ledge in that way. We might cover a touch that's engaged to the house right now as it sits, but all of that ledge, we're actually going to be kind of unearthing a bunch of the weedy vegetation in front of that one right there. Yeah, the most visible piece, the kind of the signature ledge on the property. That's going to become even more apparent because we're going to be kind of peeling back and cleaning off the vegetation from that area. But I don't think we're removing a whole lot or any right at
No.
that rear terrace area.
Yeah, I think
I
you're
don't think
right.
at all, to be honest, nothing at all, because we're.
Well, I
we're great
just said
about it.
earlier,
Yeah.
trying to get you to avoid a special permit process, which will be triggered if you remove or chip any of it. So think about it. Think about the visible stuff. That's all.
I'd recommend that the applicant take a look at the zoning bylaw that got passed most recently. It hasn't cleared the Attorney General yet, but take a look at the language. You may find ways that you're complying with the what the requirements are. But take a look at the language. I believe, Lauren, could you just confirm that zoning language is posted somewhere on the town website?
Yeah,
I will confirm and coordinate with the applicant.
Thank you.
I just to tell you, I just found it under the town clerk's page because the town clerk's office has the special town meeting warrant from December. I think, right, it hasn't been updated into the zoning bylaw yet online, so that's where you'll find it, under the warrant for the special town meeting in the town clerk's page.
One additional comment about the ledge is that there's a chemical way of getting rid of ledge if you are not going to, if you're going to be underneath a house or a structure. It's a material that you drill holes, you put it in, you wet it, and it expands and it cracks the granite. My husband removed about 25 feet of it under my house, so I know about it. It does work. But that may be also something that's useful for you as you move around the site. I think the next time that we come to, so I appreciate the fact that you've already thought through your lighting plan. I think that's really useful. I think we've talked about the driveway and, you know, how can we think about that, and can we think about it differently in certain ways? It sounds like the ledge may be less of an issue than we might have thought. Tree screening so that the new exit driveway is imperceptible as possible would be really helpful to us in seeing, you know, the concerns that have been expressed. And is there any other comments that planning board members have? I don't see any from anyone, so can I get a time and date, Lauren, for a continuation of this?
Yes, so it's going to be March 30th at 6:30 p.m.
All right.
I move to continue the hearing to that date and time.
I'll second it.
Clark Brewer,
Clark Brewer, aye.
Tom Callahan,
Aye.
Paul Grady,
Aye.
Amy Glassmeyer. Thank you. We'll see you again.
Okay, thanks
Thank
everybody
you.
for your time.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Excellent job, guys.
Oh,
Thanks.
thank you so much, Clark. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
All right. We now have our next hearing to be reopened. Lauren, would you please bring this up for us and set it in context?
Yes, I'm just trying to get the applicant. Okay, he's coming up now. All right, thank you. So again, this is the third public hearing on the agenda. We opened it, we read the public hearing notice last week, and it was immediately continued, so we didn't cover any information. This is a scenic roads work permit application for 580 Jerusalem Road. I will note this is sort of a peculiar situation for review for the planning board because it's retroactive. There were trees removed in the town right of way that were, as I mentioned, the town right of way. Jerusalem Road is a scenic road, so typically a process for that would be the scenic road work permit would take place before removal, and the applicant would sort of propose to the board what their plans were. The board would have an opportunity to weigh in, and that would be, you know, how that would unfold. This scenic roads also applies to any sort of rock. If there's an existing rock wall in the town right of way on a scenic road, any sort of modification to that existing rock wall would be subject to review by the planning board. I'll note that, as I mentioned, there was a removal of the trees that was not authorized through the scenic road work permit. So we're looking at this retroactively. The applicant will review with you what the site plan is as it is today and sort of go through the history and how we got to where we are. They have planted some plantings in replacement before they were, sort of realized that they needed to come to the board for this. So what I will suggest to the board, because, this, as I mentioned, it's not something that you typically do retroactive. What the board can consider is take a look at the trees that they've planted. The board can weigh in on, adequacy, whether you want more plantings, if what your position is on that. And then what the board may wish to consider as sort of a way to make up for the trees that were removed is an opportunity for you is we have a tree bank that's run by across the DPW. So, a donation to the tree bank might be something that you ask the applicant to as a part of this permit. And I did mention that to the applicant that that's something that, the board could consider. They were amenable to that. So I just wanted to sort of give you some frame to how you might execute a decision on this, given that the trees are already gone. So without further ado, I see the chair may have a question, and then I'll just introduce Roxanne Meller, who's the real estate agent working with the applicant, and then Jan Hansel is the developer applicant here to represent the site.
Thank you. So I'd like to be able to share my screen for a minute, please. I have the before and after images of the landscape. So this was the site prior to more than the foundation of the structure being built. And the trees that we're talking about are along the edge of the property. And so this is what we're looking at. And this was the original plan for the driveway. And then let me stop that one and go and get, oops, that's not what I want. And this is what the site looks like now. So if Mr. Hansel would like me to leave either one of these pictures up, as you can see, the vegetation has been significantly changed, as well as the driveway that was originally planned. And here is the retaining wall that is on town property. So Mr. Hansel, will you want me to leave these up, or would you like me to take them down?
You can leave it up.
All right, thank you. All right, Mr. Brewer, would you like to begin? Or no, excuse me, Mr. Hansel, how about if you talk to us about the situation? That's the right thing to do first.
What makes sense is for him to tell us what happened, then show us what was removed and show us what is being replaced. And then I'm happy to comment.
All right, thank you, Mr. Hansel.
You basically, when I was purchasing the property, it was sorry. I didn't know the town owned this big strip of property what I was purchasing, and it was no record. Even the lawyers didn't find it anywhere, and I don't know if Lauren has pictures with the trees what was removed. It was I think I have it over here. It was 1, 2, 3 trees over here. One small one was over here, and like this tree was already half dead. Most of those trees is damaged because they was growing under the high voltage power lines. And as you can see it over here and over here on these trees. I don't know if I can move it a little bit. And
Jan, are you able to share your screen so the board can see what you're looking at?
I'll stop sharing if he has a picture. Or can he share with my picture?
No, so he has an opportunity to share now. Jan, are you able to pull up an image?
I don't know if I have those pictures. I can see it over here, but I don't know how I can share it.
Jan, are you looking at a map right now? On your screen?
Yeah, I was looking for
But I really think the applicant should have a plan that shows their landscaping and that show the engineering plan that shows the extent that the stone walls are on town property. And identify what the size of the trees that were on public property that were removed and show what their replacement plan is. I mean, a donation to the tree bank, that might be a mitigating thing, but I'd really like to have a clear picture from the applicant, what happened, and then what they're doing to mitigate that.
I'm trying to find out.
And it might be your landscape plan or your original engineering plan, your survey to start with.
I have an existing survey plan right here. Hold on.
I have the site plan of 7/15/19. Would that help you?
Yes, yeah.
Okay, so let me just share my screen.
Yep.
So here is the house before the property was demolished and a new structure was built.
Yeah, this is basically for when we were starting, and you can see 1, 2, 3 trees, and here's the one small tree. You can see the power line basically going through the trees over here, and like this tree was almost dead. When we was cutting this tree, it was a big hole inside in a tree. All the trees was growing through the power lines, and that's basically. First of all, I didn't know these trees didn't belongs to me. I didn't know town took this strip 100 years ago, and it was no record about it. And that's where the mistake begins. And as you can, what we planted, it was 2 trees over here, the new trees.
Over where?
Where?
I don't know where we keep pointing, say over here, over there. I don't know where we're looking here.
Oh, hold on. I will try
You want to use your cursor on the drawing, maybe
Well, he
maybe
may not
bump
be
the
able-
drawing size up a little
Right.
bit. That shows the front area with those existing removed trees.
I'm not.
Unfortunately, I can't give him the use of my cursor, so unfortunately, he can't point.
Oh, yeah, right.
If
Okay.
we see where the trees are, you can see me pointing where the trees are, right?
Okay.
And here, and here, and here. So this is basically where the trees were. And then this is approximately the outline of the rock wall. I think it has a slant, a little bit more of a slant here. And originally it was going to be a back in, back out driveway, but then they made a circular driveway so that there was more pervious surface that was generated on the project design.
Yep.
And
Well,
the
I just think-
replacement, go ahead, Clark.
I'm sorry, I just think the applicant needs to show us exactly what happened. If he needs to get his engineer in to show us the existing plan and then the proposed plan, and from a site boundary perspective, where the stone wall is in relation to that, and then identify specifically what trees, not like that it's a half dead tree, but it's a 12-inch diameter red oak, approximately 40 feet high. Identify those trees that were removed in some level of detail, and then provide the board with what they're proposing to mitigate those trees. I don't particularly care, and I don't think the board cares what trees they're putting on their own property as a
Right.
part of their landscape package.
Right.
I think the only thing that's of issue here is what is in the right of way that was removed and what's being proposed as replacement, and to what extent the stone wall encroaches on the town's property line. And that's another legal matter. But I'd like to know specifically, exactly those details. And I think you're going to have to get your engineer to produce something for this scenic roadway mitigation hearing.
I can also share my pictures with Mr. Hansel. Thank you, Mr. Brewer. Mr. Callahan?
I mean, on our planning board page is his application with a bunch of photographs. So, I mean, we have this material submitted. We just don't have it readily available for us and the public right now. But I first agree with Clark that, you know, what I saw in the photographs and the plans that were submitted was, yeah, there've been a couple of trees put up in the front of the house, but on the applicant's property, not on the town property. And, you know, the bylaw, I'm looking at that too, let me get it up here. The bylaw that tells us that, you know, our tree warden, I'm not sure who that is, I assume it's Brian at this, there's the alternative here is either replacement of the trees that were removed on the town property, or the tree warden determines a compensatory value and we assess that compensatory value, which would go to the tree bank. We also have a provision here, unlike under the zoning bylaw, this is not a zoning bylaw, to assess a fine for the after the fact application. You know, this is the second permit for this property that we are dealing with after the fact. With all due respect to Mr. Hansel, the ignorance of the law is not an excuse under the law. And this is the second time we've had this. And I think after the first experience, I would have thought there would be great care taken to making sure no other bylaws were being violated. So, you know, I don't know that we need more. I think it's all in the application. I don't think, again, I agree with Clark that all the other landscaping done on the property, fine, but it doesn't replace what's happened here. So I would like to get our tree warden to assess either should we replace the trees that were taken down in their locations, or to assess a compensatory value. I think we should either order that replacement or the compensatory value. And I'd like to, you know, it's a token thing, but I'd like to issue the fine of $300 for this, because this is just another second after the fact problem at this property.
Thank you, Mr. Callahan. Are you
Madam
finished?
Chair, may I be heard? This is Christopher Greeley, counsel for GDI. Good evening, everyone. I wanted to note first that these trees were utility pruned and pollarded They were Norway maples, which are invasive trees within the Commonwealth of Massachusetts and had been deemed so since the 2000s, the early 2000s. These trees would not be replaced. They're illegal to plant today. My client has set aside money for the tree bank, and that was something that was done prior to the transfer of the property to its new owners. The landscaping that was put in place was native plants, which were tastefully planted, and there is the question of how proximate they are to the roadway. But the truth is that the trees themselves, and we have photographs of this, were in disrepair, rotten, deteriorating, and the tree warden would have had to take them down. I'm sure when we speak to the tree warden and provide the photographs, there'll be some consensus that these trees were not of any material value. But with respect to the streetscape, I mean, my client's willing to work with the town in any respect that we need to, and we can provide any additional details about the type of trees and the condition of them that's necessary for the board's review.
And what is this sum that you have set aside?
Tom,
For the tree? Oh, I heard mention of sum of money set aside for the tree bank. What was it you had in mind?
As a placeholder, despite the value of the trees, the amount that was conveyed as a placeholder was $10,000, which is a substantial sum given the nature of these particular trees. Again, utility pruned, pollarded, in disrepair, deterioration, and of no material value, no timber value. The only value they lent whatsoever is shade, and the plant itself is an invasive plant that can't be planted in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts.
Thank you.
thank you.
Sorry, Paul.
I presume the name on your screen is not correct. Is that right? You're not Lauren Greeley?
Yes,
You are Lauren Greeley.
I am not Lauren Greeley. No, I'm
Okay,
Christopher
I just want to
Greeley.
make sure that we have your name correct in the public hearing.
No,
That's
I understand. I jumped onto this call from my
fine.
telephone. I was on previously.
yeah, it's fine. I just wanted to make sure we get it right. Mr. Grady?
I just have a question from Mr. Greeley. Regardless of what's been put up, just I'm interested to hear what you're saying about the Norway maples and all that, that they were scrub trees to a degree and invasive. Were the proper steps taken to take them down in the first place? Were the proper steps followed initially? Or were they just taken down?
Mr. Callahan had suggested that this was a second failure and a
No,
subsequent
I'm
failure.
I'm asking you a question. Were the proper steps taken prior to taking those trees down?
The scenic bylaw in the town of Cohasset was implemented in 2018. It was not something that my client was aware of, that this was a scenic designated roadway. And it's nothing that came up during any of the permitting or anything of that nature.
So in other words, no.
In terms of the manner that the trees were removed, they were removed professionally.
So in other words, no. That's all I was looking for. That's all I have to say.
Okay. So to make this a complete hearing on behalf of Mr. Hansel and the owner of the property, we request that Mr. Hansel provide the visuals that are necessary for us to be able to verify what occurred and what we see now, which I presume, as was indicated, that documentation is on the web. As it relates to the individual wall, that is something that is separate. And it is actually, Ms. Lind, can you comment on that in terms of where that issue gets resolved?
Sure. So there is the matter the chair is referring to is there is a rock wall that was constructed by the developer, a new rock wall. And again, a similar situation, the oversight in where the boundary was between the private and public property. So the rock wall was actually placed in town right of way. that is a matter that is under review right now by the building inspector and town council, and I believe will be taken up at the select board. So that the rock wall situation is not something that the planning board will be weighing in on at this time.
All right, thank you. So with that, Mr. Hunsel, will you be willing to come with pictures and show what had happened on the site?
Yes, yeah. I think I provide most of the pictures what I was able to find to Lauren. Lauren, when I was applying for this hearing.
So may I add a comment? So we do have material that was submitted by the applicant, but the applicant just hasn't shown you them tonight. So we have them on record. It's not, the staff does not show applicant presentations. It's on the applicant's, burden to sort of present the material that they wish to present to the board, because you're making your case before the board. So we have items on record, but we just don't have a presentation of them tonight, just to clarify for the board.
Okay.
I don't think we need to continue it for that reason, because I don't imagine we're going to get anything different than what's been submitted. And I'm looking at the photos now. And there's one showing new tree planting at the front of the house, or two of them, two photos. I think we have to, I think we are really just at the point of what we're going to do to rectify this. And I would like to hear from Brian Joyce to weigh in on what was taken. I appreciate if they're Norway maples, but still, they don't go uncompensated for. And I'm glad to hear there's a sum of money. It might not require all of that sum, but I think we should just get to that, get into what the resolution is going to be. And I'd like to hear Brian's, assuming Brian's the tree warden, but his thoughts on the subject before we close this.
All right, thank you. Mr. Grady?
Aren't we better served maybe just waiting to see what the select board and the building inspector come up with, so we have a total package as to what we're looking at?
They're two completely.
I mean, there seems to me that there's been a number of quote unquote mistakes on this. And so my thoughts are we're better served waiting until, all points are in, be it from, again, the building inspector, since the wall's now on town property, the trees have been taken down. So are we going to attack it piecemeal, or?
Well, under the scenic road permit, the issue is, did he alter a pre-existing stone wall on town property? I don't think that's the case, correct?
That's correct.
That's absolutely correct.
Yeah, and I mean, if the issue is for the selectmen, what are they going to do with an encroachment on town property? That's separate from our review under the scenic road permit. So, I mean, again, I mean, if you want to really cut to the chase, I'd accept the $10,000 and assess a $300 fine for the after the fact nature of this and be done with it. And then if the tree warden in his wisdom wants to put some replacement trees that are not Norway maples in that spot, let him do so. He'll have the funds to do so.
Mr. Brewer, do you have an opinion?
Well, I'd like to continue the hearing. And I certainly want to, I think along with what Paul Grady was saying, I don't think it makes sense to do this piecemeal. In fact, even if the stone wall encroachment is under the jurisdiction of the Board of Selectmen to make a decision on, we could still also make a recommendation relative to the total things that have gone wrong here. But hearing from Brian Joyce or the tree warden would be great, and some kind of a letter from the building inspector, I think, would be great before we decide on whether the mitigation funds are adequate or anything else relative to this. I think I'd like to have the applicant be clear on what happened and then that it be clear to the entire board
All right,
what
thank you.
happened and what they're proposing.
Thank you very much. Ms. Lind?
Thank you. First, I'll just note that you do have one public comment that was received from Kathy Berrigan of 646 Jerusalem Road. The ledge outcroppings that are/were not part of the footprint of the building should be protected as stated in the new bylaw. That's what she stated. There's no other public comment that were entered. And at this time, I have heard the board's sentiments. I'm happy to coordinate with Public Works for some more specific advice. When I had reached out to them in advance of the hearing, they suggested the tree bank as an option, but I'll ask for some more specific feedback on that, and we'll coordinate with the applicant to sort of get whatever information you need to move forward and feel comfortable closing this. If you're looking for a time to continue, I'm going to recommend March 30th at 6:30 p.m.
Thank you. All right, thank you. Get a motion from the planning board to continue.
Motion to continue to the 30th of March, 6:30.
Second.
Mr. Brewer,
Aye.
Mr. Callahan,
Aye.
Mr. Grady,
Aye.
Amy Glassmeyer, aye. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for coming. Our next item is a request for Heritage Lane lot release. And it looks that the applicant requested a continuance. Is that correct, Lauren?
No, I'm sorry. That was from the last previous time that we continued, I think is what that situation was. So this application, this is a request for a lot release. It is a subdivision known as Heritage Lane that was approved back, I want to say circa 2005. Over time, as the property has been continued to develop and progress, there have been a couple of lots that have been released and allowed for development. The last lot remaining is lot number 6 in the development. And at this point, it's been about the last time the planning board, before the most recent time that this came back to the board, the last time the board had been contacted about this property was in 2011. And at the time, the board was using John Modulewski as their peer review engineer for property for different projects. There is a punch list of items that was sort of left outstanding since 2011. So when the applicant returned in the last couple of months to ask for the lot release process again, we asked them to sort of pick up where that memo had left off and outline, where we are today. They did respond to that. We then had Weston and Sampson. We had Jim Reardon, who's in attendees. I'll bring him up now. Jim Reardon did do a peer review of the site for the board. We got some comments there. There was some exchange. And then at the last time the board heard this, there were a couple of outstanding items that had been flagged that you wanted more information on. The applicant was asked to respond to that. And then we had Greg Morse submit another memo to the board most recently last week. So we have Greg Morse here to represent the applicant. And like I said, Jim Reardon from Weston and Sampson for peer review. So I'll turn it over to Greg.
Great. Thank you. Good evening. This is Greg Morse, registered engineer, Morse Engineering, representing the applicant. I think, Lauren, if you could also promote my client, Anthony Nader, who's the property developer, and his attorney, Merwin Walters. They should both be in attendance as well.
So I don't see a Mr. Nader, but Merwin Walters is here and I'll bring her up.
Thank you very much. So as Lauren just kind of reiterated, this is a subdivision project that was approved in 2004 by the planning board, was substantially constructed 2006, 2007, the roadway being constructed at that time. And then since that time, they've worked on developing the individual lots out there. There were 16 lots in total. They have all been built on, with the exception of lot number 6. Lot number 6 is the lot that's being held by the town right now as surety for the roadway work being completed. The last time that this was really looked at heavily by the town was in 2011, when the sidewalks and the final pavement were done on the site. John Modulewski was your review engineer, and again, as just stated, he had developed kind of a punch list of items that needed to be completed prior to lot 6 being released. We feel that we've completed those actions at this time. We submitted a letter back in, I believe it was August or September, documenting that those items had been completed. Your peer review engineer has completed a peer review of those, and there were 3 items that became flagged as additional items that needed more work. Those 3 items I presented last month to this board, and since then I've submitted a revised letter on February 17th addressing those 3 items. And if I can do a share screen, I can run through those 3 items here. Just bear with me one sec. So the three items were in Detention Basin number 2, which is located on lot number 1. Mr. Reardon had asked for some information regarding the as-built of that detention basin with respect to the volumes and areas of that basin. We had included on our as-built plan here these calculations documenting what the volumes, the cumulative volumes in the basin were, as well as the areas of the contours within the basins. I did review those with respect to what was approved in the original design. And I believe that those areas and volumes comply with the original design from 2004. So that's been documented. The second item that was brought up was with respect to construction of the drain manholes at the site. The drain manholes, it was brought up by John Modulewski that in the bottom of the manhole, there should be a formed invert at the bottom of the manhole. I believe that's one of your specifications in your subdivision rules and regulations, but what I have depicted on the screen here, this is the approved plan. As you can see, this is the plan that was endorsed by the Cohasset Planning Board. And right here on the screen, this is the precast drain manhole that was approved with this project. And as I zoom in on that manhole, manhole here.
Sorry, can anyone else see the maps on the screen? I just see the PDF files.
Yeah, I can't see
No.
it.
See it.
Okay, hold on, bear with me.
The share screen we see is your
file
file management.
Yeah.
Okay, hold on just a minute. Let me get it open again. Can you see this plan here?
Yes.
Yes, great. This is the approved subdivision plan. As you see here in the right-hand corner, these are the Cohasset Planning Board members that signed off on this subdivision. And right here on the plan, you'll see the typical precast concrete manhole structure that was approved with this project. Notably, if I zoom in on this project, you'll see that, or this manhole, you will see that down here in the bottom of the manhole, it actually specifies that there's a 6-inch min, and that's showing a sump, that there's actually a sump in the bottom of the manhole as opposed to a formed invert. You'll also notice that there's no notations requiring a formed invert of any kind. This approved plan is what the applicant used when he built the project, and what he built complies with this detail. So there is a discrepancy clearly between your regulations requiring the formed invert versus the detail that was used on this project and was constructed as part of this project. I would add in my In my professional opinion, formed inverts aren't necessarily required on drainage structures. I would say it's probably 50% of the time you have them and 50% of the time you don't. This drainage system here has been in existence now since 2006 or 2007 when it was built. It has not had any problems whatsoever. Again, my client built this according to the approved plan. And then the third item that was brought up, I'm going to do another share screen here. The third item that was brought up was in regards to a forebay being constructed within the detention basin. And let's see, I'm going to bring up a copy of the as-built plan. This is the as-built plan that was submitted. It was received by the Cohasset Planning Board in 2007. And the detention basin that we're talking about is right here, the detention basin on lot 1. When this basin was constructed and when these as-built were submitted, what's depicted here with these contour lines is what's referred to as a sediment forebay. The documentation shows that that forebay existed at the time it was built and at the time the as-built were submitted to the town. My client has since conveyed ownership of lot 1. Maintenance of this basin has been conveyed to the homeowners association. And at some point in time, since then to now, this forebay, which is relatively small in size, has disappeared. We believe that the owners of lot 1 have done significant landscaping on the property, specifically around the basins as well. And that forebay may have been wiped out as part of that landscape project. The purpose of the sediment forebay is to trap out any sediment that would be contained within stormwater runoff. We feel that how the basin was originally constructed certainly complied, as documented here. But we also feel that the basin continues to comply even without the presence of that forebay with the original design of intent. And that's because if you look at the outlet control device where the basin ultimately discharges over here, when you go out there and inspect that area, you don't see any visible signs of erosion or sediments that have accumulated at that location. The basin itself is well vegetated and would trap any sediment within the basin if it were to come through in any case. So I believe I've touched on the 3 outstanding items I feel that we comply with. The construction of the forebay, the formed inverts not being shown on the original design plan, and the volumes of the detention basin. I'm going to stop the screen share and I'll turn it back over to you.
All right, thank you very much for that explanation. I'd like to now turn to Mr. Reardon. Do you have any further comments?
Essentially, our comments would remain unchanged from previous.
Okay.
I'd be happy to go over them again if you'd like, or not if you would prefer not.
Would any of the planning board members like to have Mr. Reardon go over again? We saw this about.
Yes.
Okay, Mr. Brewer would like to have you please review your comments.
Okay, and tonight I'm just going to review them verbally. I think the storm is causing problems with our network, and I'm unable to bring up the PowerPoint that I had last time around. But essentially, we went out to the site to do a site visit back in December, the beginning of December, when we were originally looking at this, and Mr. Morse mentioned that a sediment forebay had been built at one time. Our understanding from looking at previous peer review memos, these are things that we had not put together. They were done by previous engineering firms doing the peer review for you folks back in 2007, 2011, I think was the other one. They indicated that there was no forebay. We went out and looked, and we didn't see evidence of a forebay having been built. I would say that, you know, I understand Mr. Morse's claim that it's essentially not causing a problem, which is roughly how I would interpret what he said. That it is still a requirement, and there's good reason for requiring forebays. They do trap sediment. They do prevent debris from getting into the storm drain system or into storm drain pipes, or blocking the outlets or things of that nature. So they are standard, they are required, and there's good reason for that. The berm around the outside edge being 5 inches, the requirement of that is 12 inches, I believe. And that's pretty standard throughout the industry. So that is, and that was noted in previous memos as well. We went out there and took a look. We would agree that there doesn't appear to be overtopping, but we've not been provided any data to review, hydrologic or otherwise, calculations that indicate that the 5-inch berm that is there currently, you know, 5 inches of freeboard, I should say, that's there currently will properly contain or prevent problems. Again, we would point out that that is a requirement. The 12 inches is a requirement, and that standard is in place consistently throughout the industry. You can go from town to town, state to state. That's very consistent from one place to another, one jurisdiction to another. I would tend to agree with Mr. Morse's assessment of the formed inverts. That is something we understand as a requirement in your standards. However, it's, you know, we would say we could kind of take that or leave it. There isn't, you know, as far as stormwater drainage networks go, there isn't necessarily a real need for those things. It's common to have them in manholes for wastewater, sanitary sewer, etc. And the reason why is because it allows the solids to flow consistently throughout the network. So I think most people would agree that carried over from wastewater to stormwater, probably at a time when those systems were often combined. So that in and of itself, while it's a standard that you folks require in town, that's not something that we would say is a critical item. But the other two things, we think that those are important standards, and they are not something that we would look at as being optional or cosmetic in any way.
Thank you, Mr. Reardon. I appreciate that very detailed summary. So I'm going to begin then with, well, let me ask, I'll begin with Mr. Brewer.
Well, as I've said before, Jim Reardon, our consulting engineer, is our eyes and ears, and what we would expect of the applicant is to complete the work in accordance with our engineers' review and requirements, and then we can do the lot release. You know, I appreciate the anecdotal information on what happened, but it sounds to me like you have some construction work to do with your retention pond, whether the owner of lot 1 is happy about that or not, but in order to comply and do a lot release, I think that's necessary.
All right, thank you, Mr. Brewer. Mr. Callahan?
I agree with Clark.
All right, thank you, Mr. Callahan. Mr. Grady?
I agree with Clark and I agree with Tom.
All right, thank you for that. Ms. Lind and I met earlier today with our building, and I guess it wasn't today, but last couple of days, with our building inspector. And it is our responsibility to ensure what was expected to be done. That's for the safety of the residents in the development, as well as for the safety of the citizens of Cohasset. It is the case that we haven't gone backwards in terms of standards. We've gone forward, and we know that there are going to be even stricter standards going forward in light of the fact that we have significant environmental changes upon us. So I agree with my colleagues that we need to ensure that what was expected is indeed present on the site.
May I be heard? I've had my hand up.
Yes, sir.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. This is Myron Walters, counsel for Mr. Nader. I think what may be being missed here is the fact that these things have been and were built according to the approved plans by the planning board. And so what happened since, I mean, if you just look at it another way, let's say that some curbs were required, curbing was required, and something happened to curbing after the applicant had successfully installed it. He's not responsible for that. So these were things that were required. They were done. That's what Mr. Morris has told you. They were done. And since that time, in the last 14 years, something's happened where they're no longer there. And it's really outside of the authority of the planning board to require someone to go back in and redo work that was done as required by the planning board. So it may sound like a good idea now, and it may, and the present engineer says that he would recommend doing it, but that's not what's going on here. What's going on here is it was done as required by the planning board, and something's happened since. That's not Mr. Nader's responsibility. And as Mr. Moore said, this area is no longer even within his control. It's owned by another lot owner, and it's under the control of the homeowners association, which he no longer controls. So it's really outside of the authority of the planning board to require him to go back and do things that he already did.
Mr. Callahan?
Well, there was also a delay of 14 years asking for the lot release, and I think a certain risk is taken when you do that. But are you suggesting we would have the authority to go after the owner of lot 1 for having altered what was built and what was approved? But my own thought is, yes, they took the property subject to the permit and its conditions, and maybe there is a legal basis for us to go after them. But is that what you're suggesting?
Well, if the planning board has a beef with anyone, it's within the homeowners association or with the lot owner who interfered with approved planning board, plans that then were implemented by the developer. But it's no longer with the developer. That's my point.
Yeah, no, but I get it. And my point is, you shouldn't have waited 14 years then. But then stuff like stuff happens like this, and my suggestion perhaps to the rest of the board is we explore with council our ability to enforce the original permit on the current owners of the property. I wouldn't, all due respect to Attorney Walters, I wouldn't release the lot yet until we get that opinion, because it may in fact be your problem for having waited. But I understand your point. But
I've only been on the board since 2008, but over the last 14 years, I certainly recall a number of requests of the planning board for the original applicant to respond to outstanding work, and it has not gone well. It has not been easy to have him focus on what the remaining work was. Now, I think we're at we're at a point where the remaining work, according to our engineer, is very specific and discrete. But our board really, in terms of motivating the original applicant, I don't think we want to release that lot until our consulting engineer is satisfied and can tell us that he's satisfied that the work has been restored and is complete according to the original application. Now, that may have other legal implications for the parties involved, but in terms of what the planning board has as a tool to motivate getting this work completed or restored, this lot release is the only thing we have. So I'd be in favor of holding it as long as is necessary.
Lauren, Miss Lynn, do you have a comment? We did have discussions briefly about this, and you may have more insights.
Yeah, so I don't have any further insight other, I really don't have anything to add to this conversation. I think the points that were just made are valid, and I'd like to be able to review further with our counsel who's not able to be present tonight.
All right, so what is your recommendation?
So I would recommend that that we plan to take this conversation up at a subsequent meeting date. It's not a public hearing, so you don't need to continue to a date and time certain, but we can certainly state a date and time certain that we will continue this, which I would recommend March 30th at 6:30.
All right, thank you. Can I get a board member?
Jim has his hand up. Does he have something else to say?
Sorry, I can't see that.
Yeah.
So thank you for recognizing me. I would just point out in regard to the idea that somebody changed the construction after the fact, that there are review memos going back as far as 2006 indicating that these things are a problem, and that it seems pretty unlikely to me that somebody would have taken down the outside edge berm 7 inches consistently around the entire pond. So I would caution to accept the explanation that the facility was altered in those ways after it was installed.
Thank you for that additional information.
Could have happened with the 4-bay though.
I suppose it could, although it seems pretty unlikely.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I just, again, I'm not suggesting we let the applicant off the hook here, but if there is another responsible party, maybe it's up to the applicant to bring them into this rather than us, but I think we should at least look into the possibility with council of anything we can do there, just in case.
All right, thank you.
As this is not a public hearing, I'm not in favor of continuing to a date certain. I'd like the applicant to get their really respond if he really wants his lot release, to get the work done, and it may take more than a month for him to figure that out. So I'm not in favor of continuing. I just let the applicant, if he wants to get his lot released, figure this problem out.
I agree with Clark.
All right. It sounds like we have a sentiment from the board. We don't need to vote on this since this isn't his hearing. So we still have a little bit of business to do. Thank you very much for attending the meeting.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much.
Okay, so what we have left this evening is a discussion of the Elm Street Corridor Working Group update. And the planning board is being asked to consider to vote to sign a letter of support for the design that has the group has reached as part of the project. Clark, do you want to make any comments?
Well, Lauren knows more about the status of this than I do. I will say it appears that the south sidewalk got reduced in width to 6 feet, which I think is an unfortunate mess. I think it should be 8-foot minimum. And there may be other details in the revised proposal that might be imperfect, but the revised proposal is an effort as a balanced effort to minimize cost impacts and get the best result design possible. But I will just reiterate that I think an 8-foot sidewalk along the south side of Elm Street is the absolute minimum for width to make this really work as a connection between the village and the harbor. But I'll let Lauren pick up the ball from there. I think she knows more about the status of things than I do.
Thank you. Yes, so I will. I actually have a presentation that I'm going to show you that's going to walk through sort of a summary, because it's been a while, I think, since we discussed it at length. I'm going to note, just for your purposes, that this is a draft presentation. It's I've been working on this for our next update to the working group and the select board, so very much draft. I don't think that there's anything in here that the working group's going to be upset with, but I haven't had a chance to review it with them, so just keep that in mind as I go through this. But this really is just a project update, sort of to recap what this is. So can you see my presentation?
Yes, we can.
Okay, perfect. All right, so again, this is just a draft. So as you all know, the Elm Street corridor was identified as a priority initiative in our in our 2019 master plan. Our harbor plan identified as select board goal in fiscal year 21. The Elm Street corridor working group was charged in 2020. There's the makeup there. I won't get into too much detail, as I know we've all heard this. As you know, a reminder, project goals: enhance connectivity between the village and the harbor, improve conditions for safety of all users. This particular phase that this group was charged with is to, conduct focus groups and work with stakeholders to begin to narrow what it means to re-envision Elm Street. And then we knew that there was ongoing or planned infrastructure improvements in the corridor that we were looking to dovetail with. So the construction timeline, we wanted to have that make sense. I'll kind of skip this one. What we've done to date is the working group since September of 2020, when they began meeting, has met 23 times for regular meetings. We've had 3 public forums that were attended virtually via Zoom in April, June, and November for phase 1. And throughout that time period, we also conducted 2 public input surveys. Other means of communication that we've used to communicate with the public are publications in the town manager's weekly email updates, social media posts. We had mailers mailed to the abutters in the corridor from the assessor lists on multiple occasions. And we created flyers that I actually laminated them myself, and I walked along stapling them to poles on a couple of occasions before the forums. And we had QR codes so that people, if they were walking, could just scan on their phone. We were trying to get as much outreach as we could, given that everything unfortunately had to be virtual, given the fact that this was going on during a pandemic. So as I mentioned, what we've completed to date is we really narrowed in sort of goals, needs, and did initial data collection. We conducted phase 1 scope of public engagement and concept design with Weston and Sampson as peer review engineers for us. Through that phase took place about March 2021 through November. In that time frame, the working group sort of narrowed down what their recommended approach was, which I'll get into more detail in the next slides. And then they had a phase 1 report out and returned to the select board with some sort of ballpark to estimating on pricing. From that, the group was asked to refine the scale and scope of that and sort of walk that back at what might be a cost value engineer approach. So we did that. And now we've been working through that internally. We've paused with our scope with Weston and Sampson. We haven't engaged on a next step yet, because we've really been trying to refine scale and scope and get an agreement on how we move forward. So up next is what we'll be doing: cost estimation and securing funding for the subsequent phases. Here is some snippets, just some screen grabs from the phase 1 report out that we did with Weston and Sampson. And what I'll just touch on here is the main image that you see to the side. This was the sort of the configuration of what the typical cross-section of the, I'm sorry, not cross-section, plan view of the residential Elm Street corridor section would look like. You see the bike lane, the grass strip there, the sharrows, and then on the bottom, you see a reconfigured intersection there. Most notably, this is, it introduced a three-way stop. It eliminated Cove Road to try to add some more green space there. It's, intending to keep the view corridor and improve safety, pedestrian access, etc. So that was what the group recommended. It was ballparked that this, to get to construction level readiness for the remaining engineering phases, would be between $500,000 and $600,000 and a $4.5 million price tag estimate for construction. When I talk about subsequent design phases, I just want to let you know that when we talk about this, there's a couple of phases here. So what we've done sort of first is what you do is you get the concept level. Then there's subsequent phases of detail that you need for engineering. So when we got for that phase, that last recommended layout, when we said $500,000 to $600,000, you're looking for budget and permit level design, both coupled to get you to construction level, which would be that $1 million price tag point. That is what we provided. What we're looking at as we now have refined scale and scope is we're looking to sort of break out budget level and permitting level into subsequent phases, because we're finding that we may be able to fund budget level in the meantime and then continue to seek grant funding dollars for the permitting level design. Because originally we had been hoping to fund the whole piece with a one-stop for grant growth that was not awarded. So we're looking to continue momentum and still seek grant funding for subsequent levels of design. When we talk about value engineering concepts, the cost variables that we considered for this area were, first of all, the design materials. Some of the complexity of ballparking. Oh, I'm sorry, Tom. I'm just going to mute you, Tom. When the ballparking estimate, it can be tough because sometimes, until you know that level of design, it's really hard to put a price tag on what you're doing. Some of the concepts that we discussed very early on with Weston and Sampson were things like brick sidewalk, which we know can be a significantly higher cost than options like bituminous concrete. There's different variables and materials there. Same thing goes for curb material. And then in addition, there had also been a concept discussion about potential for undergrounding utilities. Ultimately, as we worked through phase one, it was determined that that was just going to be too expensive of a cost to consider, so that was taken off the table. So as we look towards, when we value engineer, we try to get a more scaled down and more concise estimate. In addition, something to consider here is the degree of improvement that we're doing here. A simple mill and repave of a road bed is going to be significantly cheaper than a whole complete reconstruction dig out of the road bed. And then really when you think about that is the curb movement impacts on infrastructure and utilities. So for example, what the value engineer concept that I'm about to show you, that this tries to reduce curb movement as much as possible to try to limit the impact on the underlying infrastructure like drainage utilities. That's where you really start to see the price get exponential when you move all of those things. So with that said, as we look to value engineer these concepts, we've got a lot of feedback and useful information that was collected from the previous phase one. What you have here is sort of a snippet of what a cross section looks like on Elm Street today. Of course, this is just, this is not particularly to scale, but you have the lane widths and the sidewalk, at 4 foot at best, variable condition. What we've sort of narrowed out in terms of the residential, the straightaway Elm Street corridor piece is what you see is option 1 and option 2 is really, you're looking at the difference between eliminating parking on one of the sides in option 2 to allow for, you still have the pedestrian improvements and you get to have more of an expanded sidewalk here with grass plantings back on the side of the lawn over here. Whereas in option 1, you're just in the existing curb road layout, you are maintaining but expanding sidewalks, making improvements there. So there's a little bit of variable difference here. There's also been discussion about, well, why wouldn't you, flip the sort of what you see here is this coupling of plant and tree space area. Would you flip that and put it on the roadside? There's sort of mixed opinions as to why you may or may not do that. But these are what we're looking at conceptually for that phase. There's really, it seems like there's less debate, I would say, based on, we seem to be much closer to consensus here. When we then talk about the harbor intersection, this is a concept that our engineering department worked out that was in with the keeping of trying to meet the goals, trying to, you know, sort of take what Weston and Sampson's project proposal was, but also minimize curb movement and to try to value engineer this. This is what they came up with. This was for discussion. We've heard a lot of positive feedback about this. We've also heard a lot of very vocal opponents to this. So I think what we've reached the consensus of for the intersection is that we know no matter what, we need more public engagement really to get to the crux of what happens at this intersection. Because, you know, there's a lot of people who would like to see a reconfiguration. They really feel strongly that there's, you know, improvements that need to be made and that it's not functioning in an optimally safe condition. You also have people who say, leave it alone. Why are you fixing something that's not broken? So, you know, this is one of those projects and exercises in that you're never going to make everybody happy. We need to try to get to a consensus. So we're working on that, but we do anticipate that as we move forward with the next phase, that there will be more specific stakeholder engagement about the intersection and what that might be reimagined to. I will note, no matter where we go from here, we, no matter what, need to contract for outside consulting services because we don't have the capability and the bandwidth in-house to do the resources that are needed to move forward with this project. So no matter what configuration we look at for an intersection or like the residential piece where the sidewalks go, we need to bring on consultants to help us move forward with that. So that's sort of that's my conclusion for the presentation today. What I will note for you is that as we continue to work through this process, right now we are we're awaiting the cost estimates from third parties. So that's really the final data piece we're waiting for to return to the select board so we can have a final wrapped up package to answer all of their questions with a refined proposal. What we're seeing is we're having, like I said, you have different vocal opinions, either or. We've heard a lot of members of residents from Elm Street that like the reconfigured, that, you know, they like this sort of a concept. We've had letters of support from residents for a concept similar to this. The Master Plan Implementation Committee is penning a support letter for a concept similar. And the Harbor Committee is also working on a concept support. You know, they're sort of more focused on how this ties in with the harbor area, the walkways and pedestrian flow. As we know, there is an ongoing project also for the Captain's Walk to improve pedestrian access in and along the harbor. So, there's sort of areas that are of interest to different committees. And it was recommended from the chair of Master Plan that this board may want to sort of weigh in. And I know in past discussions, when we remember 124 and 87 Elm Street, the special permit process for the Harbor Inn site, this board had sort of, really been interested in what happens with this intersection. As you remember, there was even talk about a set aside of financing to contribute. So we do have that sort of earmarked in that decision that can be contributed to these engineering funds. But this intersection, I think it'd be, if the board feels strongly and wants to weigh in to the working group and to the select board about how we proceed with this would be an opportunity for the board to sort of voice what they feel. So does anyone have any questions or comments?
Yeah, what is the time frame in terms of the master plan implementation group and our Elm Street corridor working group making recommendations to the Board of Selectmen in terms of making this in terms of the details and the priority and timing of this project?
So I'm waiting on the information about the estimates so that we can determine when the next Elm Street corridor working group meeting is, because I need to get to them first and then to the select board. So at this point, we're probably getting back to the select board at the end of this month if I had to estimate. And right now, what we need to know is if I go back.
In the end of March?
Yeah, in the end of March. So if I look at sort of, as I mentioned, there's options 1 and 2 for Elm Street residential section. This, I don't feel that we need as much extensive public engagement on this because we've really heard from both sides. We sort of know what this is going to look like. It's just sort of the fine level details. Not to say there's going to be no public engagement, but it's not like we need robust forums about thinking about all sorts of different concepts. We've already done that work here. Whereas the intersection goes, I think there's a lot more conversation that needs to take place here because there's just simply so many ways to do it. And we've heard different concepts, so we need to have a little bit more of exploration here. So what we're looking for phasing right now, we're getting information on how much it would cost to do this piece, the residential strip, and then also costing out what it would cost to do this piece. And that way, when we return to the select board and, and we're going to have the working group make a recommendation on what they want to propose to the select board, but ultimately we need direction on, are we funding, and if so, how, the whole, both of these pieces of the street, if you will. And then from there, we'll get to consensus on what it looks like. But right now, we can't even get to any more level of engineering before we have someone on board to do the work. Does that answer your question about timeline? Because it's a little tough for me to answer right now until I have those key dates worked out.
Well, I think it does. I just wondered if at this point, maybe it would be presumptive for the planning board to make a recommendation on it without, I mean, other than a general one, we're in support of this project and how it ties into the harbor and the village connections or something like that. But in terms of working out the details, it's a tough part of any project like this.
I think that's a fair statement. The only thing I want to flag for your purpose is if the board feels strongly that the intersection should be reconfigured in some way, it'd be important to make that known because we have very vocally loud opponents against doing anything with the intersection. And if we can't even get to the point where we're not even going to fund trying to get that engineering work done and that public engagement work done, then that part's not going anywhere. So,
Well,
so
I mean,
we need the support to know that you even want to explore that at this point.
I mean, I've probably seen a dozen different designs for this particular intersection.
Yeah, there have been hands up already. Can you? I want to kind of do this.
Let him finish.
No, please let him
Well,
finish.
I just wanted to make the point that there's been many different designs for that intersection, and what Jason put together as a value engineered design that you just saw is pretty good. I think it works for the fire safety access going out of the firehouse and south, and it preserves the Elm Street margin kind of straightaway, while also having a dog leg that slows traffic down and makes it a safer intersection for everybody. So I think it's pretty good, but I still think there's room for improvement for that particular intersection. So any other comments are good.
Tom and then Paul.
All right, well, I feel extremely strongly, as I think I've made clear before, about the redesign of this intersection, and we made it an integral part of our permit for the hotel site. And not only will it improve what I still think is an unsafe intersection today, its main purpose is to create setback to this project, which I still do not believe that the public has a sense of how large this project is going to be when it's brought forward from the footprint of the existing building right up to the sidewalk. It's going to, the Zoom presentation, that's what we had to deal with. It just didn't convey it. And I think this is critical. And I think we need, as planners, with all due respect to the opposition, I understand it to be a handful of people at best. And in so many other past projects, we've had a small minority of naysayers kill something that would be better for the community. Previous attempts to redo Elm Street and the village being two that I remember in particular. And I think it's very important for this board, particularly since we incorporated it into our permit, that we make a very strong letter of support for the redesign of this intersection. And it's incumbent upon us not to kick the can down the road. We are the planning board who does planning for this community, and we should make our position known on this.
All right, thank you. Mr. Grady?
Well, Tom, you and I part company on this one because I've never been anything but clear about my feelings towards the Elm Street corridor. I think it's Potemkin Village set up. I'd like to know, first off, who's paying for it, since we're Not all of it, but some of it, some of the costs be borne by our friends at Cohasset Hospitality Partners. We talked about that.
We assessed
But-
something to them in the decision, I believe.
Wait a minute, Tom, I'm not done yet.
Yeah,
So anyway, I look at one piece that we're improving for a select few. That's the way I look at it. And I don't consider it just the whole town, especially when you drive around and you take your car out on potholes and street corners and no sidewalks and anything like that in many places. But we're increasing some property value significantly along the way. We're increasing the desirability of a project that's not even built yet, that doesn't have affordable housing in it. But that's got to go someplace else that may not have a sidewalk or a potholed road. So I'm not really up at this point in time for signing any letter of support. And again, please don't get me wrong. I think there's been an awful lot of hard work and some dedication, a lot of dedication put into this Elm Street corridor and the people that have worked on it. So I don't mean to detract from that in any way, manner, or form. But I'm not in favor of signing a letter of support at this point in time. When you see something getting fixed up for, as I said, a select few, increasing the property values and negating it from certain people that might be deserving of getting into that part of town, but they don't seem to fit. And again, when I drive around, I see people, streets without sidewalks. I see potholes. I see roads. And I see where they want to stuff people in. And I'm not just speaking personally, I'm speaking that in a whole bunch of different areas of town, which is something we are working on. I think it's having a positive effect. But I don't want to be anything but unclear about my feelings towards Elm Street. It's a nice street. I advocated earlier on, maybe bricking the sidewalks, putting some gas lamps on and being done with it. So that's my thoughts on Elm Street. So I didn't want to mislead anybody. That's what I advocated all for. You could brick it up. You could break down the whole downtown area. You have a nice walkway. But I'm not for doing things at the detriment of the rest of the town when the town's going to bear the cost for a just a limited group of people and people that are going to utilize it. That's my thought on the Elm Street corridor.
Thank you for your comments. Tom, do you want to say something? Because if you don't want to say something.
no, I respect Paul's position on it. I just think that, that intersection is used by everybody in town who goes down that way. Yeah, you could say that having a setback and a green space in front of the building is going to enhance its value, but again, I'm looking at the impact on the rest of the town. The town in its wisdom passed that bylaw that let that project be what it is. And I think we have an opportunity to offset some of the downsides of it, and we should take that opportunity. That's all. I don't look at it as benefiting the property owner as much as mitigating the impact of the property's redevelopment to the rest of the community that everybody's going to see no matter where they live. They're going to come down there at some point in time. So, but, reasonable minds can differ on this, but I think it's difficult for the planning board to be on the sideline of a planning issue.
All right, I really appreciate what everybody said. And I feel like Tom does, that unfortunately and fortunately, we have started down a path where leaving something unfinished, and it will come to be a very serious problem as soon as the structure is built and the first residents arrive. Now, I'm perfectly willing to say that we should still cost share with the Cohasset Hospitality organization. They are reaping the vast majority of the benefits of this project. And perhaps they would be open to discussing the possibility of some sort of shared financial undertaking. Some places actually work with the developer and they get the developer to essentially bring in an amenity like this at a very low rate of cost to money. And the towns use those resources to be able to build the project and have a payment that they make for the support that they gain. So, I mean, we just haven't negotiated for this at all. We haven't tried. I mean, what we've been doing.
Amy, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but we did try. That was brought up in some of the meetings. It was brought up. I don't think it was reacted too favorably by.
I know because I brought it up, but that doesn't mean that there isn't a way for us to return to that question. And there isn't a better body that is elected in the town than we are to actually say, you know, maybe we need to raise money to do it. And maybe we need to have people who have resources participate. I mean, that's the problem I mean, we're a small town, but by no means are we a poor town. But I will say that on behalf of the people that have put all that time into trying to get an intersection made more effective than it currently is now, that if we don't sign a letter of support, then it means we are basically opposing our own final decision on the project as a whole. And that doesn't make sense. I mean, if we didn't want the project and we didn't want the change, there was a time when we could have voted no, and we didn't. And we had 200 people showing up at town meeting when I stood up and said that we needed more time to study it because there were things that were not visible that needed to be seen, and they will be still found. They will find what's under the ground, and they'll find out whether or not it's stable. But we can't, you know, say, well, I don't want to play anymore because I'm not happy. I'm not happy either in certain respects, but it's our responsibility as elected officials to go the end of the race.
Well, I mean, I would say that we don't have to vote to support for, you know, wholesale changes that we don't actually know what they are exactly. I mean, we saw the graphic of a section and we saw the graphic of the intersection, but the plan is to change the whole length all the way to the village. And that's sort of an extrusion, what you see on the left-hand side of the intersection, extruded out, as well as some changes to the area in front of the veterans memorial, that it's just a wide open area of asphalt. But I mean, I'm on board with Amy that the funding of this, if we don't get a grant from the state, maybe there are other grants that might cover part of it. Maybe we can get the development community on board with some help. Maybe people could buy bricks, and then maybe the scale of the project and some of the details can be value engineered so that you're getting the most value for every dollar. But I mean, I would say that hospitality partners, they do benefit from this area being figured out, and it's not entirely impossible that they might want to participate. But I think that having this area figured out is a great benefit to the whole town. And it's a change that's been in the making since 1970, when the original taking and widening of Elm Street happened. It's just that the original plan fell apart. But here we are 50 years later with an opportunity to do something, and we have to determine whether we have the will to have something that might not be perfect for everybody, but it's damn good for most everybody.
Well, you know,
Or
there's
for the town as a whole.
I mean, one of the things that we have never even explored is tax increment financing. We haven't thought about, you know, we're about ready to have a 10,000 square foot house built in town. We've never thought about raising our fees to match the consequence to the town. And if,
Well, I understand what you're saying. You're saying that.
and I just think we should do it.
People who are burdening town services should probably pay more, and not just every little taxpayer paying more and an override and at town meeting. But I think your point is valid, that there are creative ways and ways that other communities are funding projects and funding their burdens that are appropriately apportioned instead of apportioned over everybody. And I agree with you. I
agree with that.
I think there's a project there. I don't know exactly what it is yet. I think the planning board has a responsibility to say something about it, not stand back away from it.
So why
But I
don't we,
want to make
why
sure
don't
the
we do
timing
just,
is right for us to say something and make recommendations to the Board of Selectmen. So that this
yeah,
has
why
a
don't we do
possibility
exactly
of
what you
continuing.
just said? Let's write a letter that says this should be done, and we should find the way to raise the money to do it.
And that's great.
And just say it in public. We're so afraid of saying it.
No, we're not. We can.
Well,
We can do whatever we want as a board
Well,
in terms
so
of recommendations.
So I will draft a letter that says something, and I want everybody to help write it. And Paul Grady, I want you to put your 2 cents in so you feel like you can sign it. Because,
Amy, it's gonna take a while for me to put a pen to paper. I'll tell you
well,
that.
that's fine.
When it comes to supporting the Elm Street corridor, I'm just being honest, and I've been honest all along. All right, I can get some people against me, but that's fine by me. Again, I don't think it benefits too many people. I think it benefits a select few. And that's it. I've said this about this town being a destination town. It's not. It's a bedroom community with a beautiful harbor. That I think people try to make something that's not.
So in terms of making a recommendation to the Board of Selectmen, it sounds like Lauren Lynn said we need to make one by the end of the month.
Yeah, that's right.
Because the planning board doesn't want to sit there and say, yeah, kill the project, wait another 20 years, who cares?
Well, and if Paul doesn't want to sign, that's fine. I'll start drafting a letter that is our recommendations. I'm going to say everything we said tonight. And if you want to sign, go ahead and sign it. But if we don't send some message, we are not doing our job.
Well, the great thing about these Zoom meetings is you know exactly what everyone has said. You don't have to go through the meeting minutes. It's all right there.
It's totally true. Although I have to tell you, it's a mess when you're trying to deal with it. Okay, so I'm going to do that, and I'll do that this weekend because it's the end of the month.
Can we put together a special meeting to just discuss this for over a half hour, 45 minutes between now and the 30th, or prior, whatever it is, prior to the selectmen's meeting?
Lauren, can you figure out what we can do?
Yes, I can't add a meeting into your schedule because I won't be here. But I can add the time when we meet next. We're meeting on March 16th. We have 26 Lambert's Lane continued, but other than that, we don't have an application. The other items that we heard tonight are going to our second March meeting. So we have time on the 16th to talk about this.
Great.
The 16th is too late.
No, the selectmen aren't going to talk about it till the 30th.
Select board at this point where it's going to be at the end of March.
Okay, so I'm going to write it short and sweet, and I hope you add, everybody add 3 sentences and we'll have a 15-sentence letter. That's all we need. Okay, so we have a new meeting. Thank you all. Does anybody want to report on anything else?
No.
Nothing more than a motion to adjourn.
I'll second that.
Well, wait a minute. I want to say something.
Wait a minute. We have a motion.
I know. I'm stopping.
Let it say your piece.
This was a good meeting for us. We did a really great job tonight. We had things that we could have fought over or been rude or whatever, but we did a really great job tonight for the town. The things that needed to be done and said were said and done, and I think you should feel proud of yourselves. So that's all I have to say.
Now can I do that motion to adjourn?
It's already on the table. It's been seconded.
Can I get a second? Aye. Okay, Mr. Brewer.
Aye.
Mr. Callahan. Aye. Mr. Grady.
Aye.
Aye, Amy, and thank you, Lauren Lynn, for once again being with us.
All right,
Thanks, everyone. Take care.
Bye.